Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. With the conclusion of True Detective Night Country this past Sunday, we welcome our second guest from the show, production designer Daniel Taylor. Daniel will walk us through what it took to design the show and the intricate detail required to transform Iceland to Alaska. Please be warned, there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Daniel. Hi Dan, thanks for joining me today.
Pleasure, absolute pleasure.
We're here to talk about True Detective Night Country, which, as of this recording, has just started airing. But I've seen all the episodes, so we'll be talking about probably every aspect of the show. But don't worry, this will come out just after the last episode airs, so no one gets in trouble. So we're all clear on that side, all cleared by HBO, so it's all good. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this. I feel like our episode is kind of 8 months in the making because we're going to talk about something else we never got to, and then we took a
Oh
bit of a
yeah, of
break.
course. We were gonna catch up about Tetris, weren't we? I think there was a moment for that, and then I think originally, and then I think True Detective was going to come out in November. I think there were the 6 episodes running up till Christmas, but with the actors' strike, I think Jodie was wanting to be a part of the kind of the publicity, the press world tour that I think they've gone on, that they've postponed it and to start last week or week before last. So you've seen all 6, have you?
I've seen all 6, so I was really lucky that when I contacted Florian, the DOP of the show, the people that look after him, the publicity people, managed to get me all 6, and I was just like, it's like Charlie from Willy Wonka,
Yeah,
where
Charlie
you get
Bucket.
that's it. You get the golden ticket and you're like, oh my gosh. But then also you feel like you're part of a club as well because you got a screener and it's just like, oh.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
like, even though working in industry is quite fun and like knowing the sort of behind the scenes and certain things, still getting a screener is still like a really exciting thing. As
Yeah.
so loser as that sounds on my part, but it was like when it hit my inbox, I was like, I can't believe this. But I
Yeah.
made sure when I watched it to watch one episode a night and not binge it.
Oh, did
Uh,
you? Yeah. I think that's always the trick, isn't it? I think because a few of my friends, although it's kind of considered event telling coming out each week, they're like, oh, we're going to watch it all on the last episode in one go. And I kind of think as much as it plays out as a film, as a very long film, I think there's something exciting about watching it per week or per night, as you've done. Just allowing the suspense to build a little bit, thinking about it during the day or the week before you kind of, get into it again on that Sunday evening. Or I think we have it Monday, don't we, here? But yeah, it's coming out nine o'clock on Sundays in the US.
yeah, so I think they screen it in the UK at the same time,
Oh, do
but
they?
I think so because they used to do it with Game of Thrones as well and Last of Us because
Yeah.
when there was Last of Us was showing, I was on night shoots. So when the time I would wake up or come home, you lose track on night shoots.
Yeah.
It would already be on the Skybox. It was like, well, this is not a bad sort of time, but
Yeah.
I think there is some sort of crossover with that. But
Yeah.
again, I think with a show like this, you do need to give it a bit of time to marinate to not binge it. I know as easy as it is to say, but I think s- sometimes you do just need to take a bit of time to
Yeah.
watch each episode, take it in, let it marinate, and then go into it.
Yeah. I think there's quite a lot of kind of red herrings. There's lots of conversation with other suspects, and I think it's quite good if you do have the opportunity to take a moment to process. I think watching kind of 3 episodes back to back, or even the full 6, I think you're such a fast roller coaster that there'll be scenes that you'll have completely forgotten by the time you get to the end of it. Whereas if you watch them week by week, you get time to process and think it through.
Yeah, 100%. And I think as well with it being a heavy subject matter, in terms
Yeah,
of like when you're dealing with death and murders and stuff like that.
yeah,
You do need to take a little bit of time to like take a break from the shows as well, because
yeah, yeah, yeah,
it
yeah,
can be a lot to take in, but
yeah.
that's just how it is. But getting to my questions, how did the project come about and what made you want to take it on?
So I I've known Issa, who wrote and directed it for a few years now. We did a project called, actually, it was my first production design gig on something called Britannia 2, which was a Sky Atlantic thing written by the Butterworths. And Issa just happened to be the kind of the fourth block director. I say just happened because I think she was due to start shooting something else for Vertigo, which was one of the production companies that Britannia 2 was made by. Um, and for whatever reason, I'm not sure now, that project went down. I think that was actually going to be in her in her home country of Mexico. Um, um, so she came over. She ended up directing the fourth block, and we got on really, really well. And we stayed in touch, and we stayed in touch through COVID. And there were a couple of smaller films. She did a film called Tigers Are Not Afraid, which kind of met rave reviews. And I think off the back of that, she'd kind of written and developed and was going into kind of very soft or very early prep for her next feature. But then she got offered Britannia 2. She took that gig. She came over here. We met. We stayed in touch, and we stayed in touch all the way through COVID. And it was probably around 2 years ago. It was probably around January, certainly the end of January, 2022, when she phoned and said that she'd been writing something to for HBO, and it was the kind of fourth season of True Detective. And would I be interested in kind of putting my name in the hat for to production design it? I mean, True Detective, even seasons 2 and 3, which are considered nowhere near as good as one, by their own rights, are still incredible bits of television. So when she mentioned just being part of that franchise or that kind of brand, I was just blown away. I just thought I can't believe that this is ever likely to happen. I've been quite lucky because I did a little film called Dream Horse off the back of Britannia 2. And then the director of Tetris saw Dream Horse and really, really loved it. And he was a guy that I'd worked with years and years and years ago. We were both floor runners on something called Bad Girls, that ITV drama, prison drama. We were both floor runners, and he was a floor runner that I was not art department runner. So we were mates from there. So he watched the Dream Horse and contacted me and said, "Oh my God, you're designing, come and do Tetris." So I did Tetris. Matthew Vaughan was the exec producer of Tetris and liked what I'd done with that, and then asked me to join him on Argyle. And if I hadn't have done Argyle, then HBO probably wouldn't have said yes to agreeing to Issa to take me on to True Detective. So it's been quite a kind of, it's been big jumps up in the last 4 or 5 years. So she asked me if I would put a pitch together. I jumped on a call with Mary Jo, who is our series producer, and then Pastel, Adele and Mark, and they form kind of Pastel Pictures with Barry Jenkins, and they all kind of as a group produced True Detective. They liked my pitch, and then I think by the end of February, I was kind of on a plane going to Alaska. I mean, it all happened very, very swiftly. I think the idea was that they wanted to go and recce Alaska to see where else we would be able to recreate it. But because Alaska, and certainly the town that our fictional town that Ennis is based upon, is pretty northern in Alaska. And in fact, there's two little towns called Nome and Kotzebue that we recce'd that it's kind of loosely based on. And they wanted to go and take the production designer over there to see where else in the world we could recreate it. So we looked at Manitoba, we looked at Patagonia, Nova Scotia, and then we settled on Iceland.
So before we sort of jump into your answer, Bad Girls, that is a TV show I haven't heard anyone mention in years. It always feels like when I talk to certain guests, especially like from the UK, and you start talking about certain shows that you grew up with, or not necessarily grew up with, but you knew it was there in the sort of zeitgeist. There's always shows that people always mention that I just think, oh, do you know what? I haven't thought about that show in years. I can't
No.
believe somebody
Yeah.
else is mentioning that, and it's like tweak something in my memory.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it is becoming a distant memory. Although, to be really honest, I started out as I kind of I wanted to be an airline pilot when I first when I kind of first left school, and it was only when I watched Train Spotting in like 1996 or 1997, which is when it kind of freshly when it first came out, that I decided I didn't want to be an airline pilot. I wanted to be involved in kind of the aesthetic of storytelling, or how we can kind of enhance the narrative. And I didn't even know that there was a specific art department, really. I didn't know. I just thought you just kind of turned up and shot. I just didn't realize that there was a kind of an industry or a process. And I then my mum knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody whose wife worked for the construction manager who was building the Bad Girls prison. And I went along to the construction workshop, um, in a three-piece suit, literally straight out of school, and got the job. I mean, bizarrely. And then I didn't haven't been to university or film school, or I learned to draw at various different drawing courses that I've picked up along the way. I've done my time in the department. I went to the graphics side and was a graphic art director, and I've been an assistant art director, supervisor, and and then yeah, finally made that final hop across to production designing. But yeah, it all started at Bad Girls.
Also, it's funny mentioning as well going to your first job in a suit because I did the same thing as well.
Did you?
And you turn when I turned up, everybody was very casual, so it was like, oh, okay. And then it was like, oh, it's like that, and you think, oh,
Yeah,
this is not
no,
this is not a good look, but
no.
it's still funny though, right?
I think yeah. I mean, I can remember wandering in with my little suit, covered in zits, and I think I'd still got my little briefcase from when I was in upper sixth. I mean, I must have looked like such a spanner. But interestingly, I met the production designer, and so bizarrely, he went to the same school as I had done, 50 years before me. Hannaford School in Shepperton. So we immediately hit it off because that was the only thing on my CV. I didn't have anything else. It was just like, 10 GCSEs and three A levels. There was no kind of trainee or internship on any movie or TV show. It was literally straight out of school. So yeah, I think I got the job based on the fact that we'd gone to the same school as each other. But yeah, that was. And then I had 5 years on Bad Girls, actually. I spent 5 years because there weren't so many shows. Like, it was only, I think Channel 5 was out. I think Channel 5 was a bit, certainly no streamers or Sky so I did a whole season, a whole series on Bad Girls, and then kind of just twiddled my thumbs until the next series started, and went on and did Bad Girls 2. It's just, that was my career until Bad Girls 5, when I kind of flew the nest and went on to do something else. I can't remember, maybe EastEnders or something. But yeah, troubled beginnings.
No, we will have to start somewhere. But I think,
That's very kind, thank you.
but then also listening to the sort of the lead up to True Detective, and the fact that there's a funny way that somebody that you knew coming up was directing, and then getting Tetris, and then that leading to Argyle, to then basically felt like dress rehearsals for the real thing in a way, that you had to
Yeah,
prove that you can handle something at that budget
yeah,
and know what you're doing in a way. It's funny because as audience members and people who don't know about these things, is that I guess it's one thing if somebody can come up with a good pitch and design, but it's another thing if people can be able to handle the budgetary stuff that comes along with it, which
yeah,
as people, when they think about making art, it's not necessarily something you think about. You just think, no, we'll just build this, we'll build that. And you're like, but how much is it
yeah.
actually going to cost?
Well, yeah, I mean, and to be really honest, I think you know those last three projects that I've done, Tetris and then Argyle and True Detective, I've had the same supervising art director with me, whose name's Joe Riddell, who's kind of like we've been through the ringer on a couple of those projects at times. It's been really, really tricky and challenging and kind of without her pragmatism and kind of brilliance and skill at running the budget and the department, I don't think I would have, well, certainly wouldn't have got Argyle from Tetris, and I then definitely wouldn't have got True Detective from Argyle. So you know, I'm definitely kind of leaning on her hugely. She's magnificent.
I think as well that shows how important it is to have a good team and people around you to
Yeah,
help, because it's not just yourself doing it, it's also the army behind you helping out as well
yeah,
and pulling in the same way.
yeah.
Um, you in your answers as well, you're mentioning about doing your recce's in Alaska, and I think we can kind of see there's like a number of film influences peppered in to the show, and I think this is probably one that's quite well documented as being the thing
Yeah,
with the DVD slip in the first episode. And I guess the when the researchers are frozen in ice, that's a big sort of homage to it as well, to when they find people frozen in ice in the thing.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but when it comes to something like this, a show like this, like where do you begin in your research, and are
Um,
there specific films that you look at, or
well,
is there like photos as well that you look at?
yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a combination, actually. And to be really honest, that kind of having the benefit, I've never been on a production before that has been so kind of well put together as this one. And I think that's kind of largely down to how great HBO are, and they are phenomenal. And MJ, actually, our producer, who was insistent that the production designer went with them on the recce to Alaska. And I think I mean, obviously you can Google away and pull images off of the internet, but actually standing in those spaces, breathing them in, talking to the people, going into their homes, you know, every location or every set that we had on True Detective, I think I went and found in Alaska at some point. So we had really, really good reference photos. Yes, there was some kind of filmic reference that kind of weave through the thing for sure. When it comes to the design of the Salal, it was very much kind of the Overlook Hotel and the Nostromo from Alien were kind of key points of reference in terms of a feeling and an environment for the audience. The Corpsicle, I think there's a guy called Phil Hale, who is an American painter who kind of paints these really kind of visceral images of kind of shrunken heads with skin pulled back, dislocated jaws, which she responded to. We also had the Japanese Ring, the original. There's a beautiful moment or horrifying moment, sorry, when the cupboard door is pulled back and revealed this kind of face with this dislocated jaw and the eyes kind of looking off to one angle. There was another reference. There was another sculptor, actually, that Charlotte Dirks, the set decorator, brought to my attention, called Belinda de Bruckier, who again kind of creates these kind of stretched skin sections of body and animal, which we used heavily in terms of our corpsicle design. But I would probably say more than anything, when I went to Alaska, I took, I don't know, 6,000 photographs of absolutely everything. And then when we went back, we just took them up. We put them up on the wall, even from the sun path to the interior of the fish station to the interior of the pub. I literally covered every set, and we used that as a kind of a benchmark. Um, there were some other Alaskan photographers actually that we touched. We used somebody called Brian Adams, not the singer, and somebody called I think Jen Kearney and Dana Luxembourg, and they were photographers from our area who we use as reference heavily too. Yeah.
On your recce's, because I know locations would be organizing and talking to people about sort of looking at people's houses. But do you ever feel like it was a bit funny and odd walking into somebody's house and being like, yeah, this is perfect, what we're sort of looking for? Or did you ever feel like it's slightly intrusive as well in a weird way?
I think it only felt intrusive when there were people that weren't comfortable with us being there, or didn't want us to be there. I mean, we actually met the most perfect Pete Pryor, and we I snapped his interiors, and we used them as we basically not recreated kind of exactly, but there was the layout of the space, the kind of lighting of the space, the color palette of the space. We kind of we used a lot, but he wasn't. He really welcomed us in, and we kind of sat down and we had we listened to them pray. We had seal with them, dried seal. We ate kind of dinner with them. So I would say I don't recall on this recce there being a moment where it was slightly weird to be inside. I mean, I think going up to Northern Alaska is not obviously not like shooting in London where you're around filming all the time. There's a novelty to it, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, have you seen the film unit? Yeah, yeah, we've had them in our house." So it was kind of there was still a level of enthusiasm and excitement, whereas back here in London, everyone's a bit more kind of a little bit more worn down by the prospect of filming happening down their street. So no, I think everybody was kind of keen to have us around.
Okay, because I can imagine sometimes as well, just the idea of having someone there, you think, well, sometimes it can be quite off-putting. But I guess when people are kind of explaining what they're doing and what they want to show, and again, understanding of how certain cultures live and how they go about their daily routine, sorry.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I mean, obviously the kind of the schedule of the scout is kind of planned way before we get there. But I also think that what I try to do is be as enthusiastic and as excited to see people's interiors, not only because genuinely I am thrilled and excited to see how people live, but also I think if you feel that you could be that interested in them as humans, how they exist and how they kind of what their daily life routine is, then I think they feed off of that, right? And are welcoming too, I think, in response. I think there was a pressure, I think I felt, and certainly, well, I think we all felt as a kind of as a production company, as a project, to make sure that we were respectful to the indigenous communities. And I think the indigenous community were kind of keen that they aren't often represented on mainstream TV as they will be, as they are being on True Detective. And there was a kind of a pressure that we felt to make sure that they're kind of represented correctly, or kind of, respectfully.
I know we've seen some major releases with indigenous characters. So if you look at something like Killers of a Flower Moon,
Mm.
which I know it tells it's quite a tragic story, so it's not, maybe positive is not in the right word to use, but it's kind of shining a light on those sort of untold stories that Joe Public wouldn't have an idea about, and get a sort of idea of like how different people and cultures have been treated throughout history, and sort of learn a bit more and hopefully encourage people to sort of seek out a bit more
Yeah.
um, on those sort of topics, but then also understand people's cultures. And that was sort of what one of my questions was going to be, is about like how do you as a designer, because you're not from that sort of background, how do you go about being respectful in the way of your designs, and not sort of making your designs caricatures?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was always a kind of a very difficult or very delicate path to tread. I mean, in truth, it was made very easy by the set decorator Charlotte, who was able to kind of really immerse herself in any bit of text or reading or kind of photography she could get hold of. She kind of had this amazing kind of lookbook. But more key to that, we had two producers on the project with us called Princess and Tagnak, who were both from those indigenous communities, and essentially every set that Charlotte and I had kind of sat down and kind of started to kind of plan through, once we'd got our kind of shit together, we were able to then jump on a call with those guys and just say, hey, so this is what we were thinking about this interior. This is what we were thinking about their dressing, their color palette. And there would be a back and forth with Princess and Tagnak about stories that they had about characters that were similar. There would be little dressing notes that they would have that they would introduce to us. And we just kind of mulled our way through as a group, basically. So no one space was only designed by me or just members of my department. It was a collaborative effort with members of the indigenous community that were on the job. And basically my role as the production designer was to make sure that there weren't spaces that looked the same or that could be confusing, and that they generally followed a kind of a threaded path that took us through to the end. I wasn't really, I was able just to kind of steer them left and right a little bit, but those guys designed the spaces because I felt that was the right way to go about it. I mean, obviously we had an overarching kind of design brief that we wanted it to work within, but that was pretty broad, and we kind of allowed them to kind of design the spaces with us, so we didn't kind of step outside the box too much, really. And that was the same with our all of the art. All of the art was designed by a lady called Sarah Whalen Lun, who is a tattoo artist, and she is in Upiak. And she would design all of the tattoos, all of the graffiti, all of the paintings, all of the artwork that you kind of, the indigenous artwork that you see throughout the show. And then my team in Iceland would kind of look to recreate it or kind of slightly tweak it or change it. But it was always coming from the kind of correct place to start with.
I can always imagine as well, like being from the UK and then going over to see different cultures can be a little bit daunting and difficult, because everybody's so different and there's certain things that we may not understand because we're not from there.
Yeah.
And I do like the answer in terms of getting all your shit together and then being like, okay, this is what we want to do, and then having people sort of walk you through, helping you design those sort of aspects. I think it can be quite easy to just say, oh, if we see it in this sort of way or this sort of light, let's just mock it up this way and go from there, rather than actually being faithful to people's cultures.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was always, it felt like it was always the right way to do it. And the kind of the eye of Sauron is on True Detective the moment it comes out. I mean, I cannot tell you the amount of stuff that I've been sent, kind of little red herrings that kind of viewers have picked up on, and even just the hockey scores, and 5 and 3 I think is on the scoreboard, and they're like, maybe there's 3 people under the ice and 5 people are in the ice. You know, this the links. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that there is so much focus on this show that I wasn't prepared to leave anything up to chance in terms of designing it correctly.
With those things, I believe that when there's so much that the audience will look at to then try theorize and say what's what, or even as you said, 5-3, there could be 3 people under the ice, there could be this, there could be that. I think it's amazing how the links that people will go through to try create this sort of like the theories and what they're going to back up with.
Kind of other backstory that's kind of linking the other episodes together, and actually linking the seasons together too. I mean, it's quite incredible the kind of the theories that the audience are kind of coming up with. It's exciting to read it. I can't believe that so many people are kind of have taken it kind of gone to those lengths to kind of study it in so deeply. So yeah.
I think it's when you've made it is when people are doing the freeze frames and posting them online. Like, what does this mean? It's like,
Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah,
us.
yeah. There was
Uh,
one actually that was um we'd got a paleoclimatologist in that was kind of like, to be honest, like designing those interior spaces with the indigenous community. I wanted to make sure that we didn't mess it up with our Arctic Research Centre. So there was a guy called Robert Mulvaney, Sir Robert Mulvaney, I think. And he spent huge amounts of time on in the Arctic and in the Antarctic and on research centres. So we've been back and forthing with him quite a bit about the interior design. And I there's part of the scene that says "We are all dead" on the whiteboard. I thought it'd be quite nice to write some other text, obviously, on the whiteboard, so it's not just kind of front and center. And asked him maybe the day before we shoot the scene, Robert, can you just send me over some kind of appropriate text that we could write on the whiteboard? And he's like, yeah, of course. And he sent me a load of stuff through. And so I've kind of just literally the day before shooting, it's my handwriting on the whiteboard, writing up these kind of columns of latitude and longitude and certain levels of whatever. And that's all over the internet today. I noticed there was kind of people ringing coordinates saying we should be looking at this coordinate in episode 4 because that might link back to that in episode 1, and that further links back to season 1. And I'm like, wow, it was just literally some text, some figures that this paleoclimatologist has sent through to me to write up. But yeah, it's great. It's fun.
it's quite funny because imagine if he was in on it as well, but he was like,
Yeah,
this was set,
yeah, yeah,
this
yeah,
was for people in a like a spiral.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
He's kind of in on it as well. That'd be quite funny. But going back to the shooting itself, because you mentioned that the you settled on shooting in Iceland and it doubles as Alaska. Now, I've shot in Iceland before, but it's doubled as up, I think, as Norway. But when it came, and I can imagine that there's always certain things that people look out for. But when it came to designing and using locations, like how did you make sure the town felt American and had that lived-in feeling? I think you already
Well,
sort of touched on it earlier with when you did the recce's and going into people's houses.
yeah. I suppose. Well, there was a few elements really to that, a few answers to that question. We we knew what we wanted to recreate in terms of our Ennis, our fictional Ennis, in terms of its architecture. We kind of knew what we wanted it to look like as an exterior, as a town. And I think the thought was that although we may not find it in Reykjavik, there are plenty of little towns as you go around the coastline that are a little bit more kind of broken, a little bit more tired Alaska, and a little and more suitable in terms of a kind of match to our Ennis or match to the town that we thought we wanted to create, or I wanted to create. And actually, there was a town called Delvik, which was north of Akureyri, which is the main town in the north, and it's an old fishing town. It's got an old fishing port. Plenty of industry that's kind of broken, and it's feeling that kind of feeling the decay of being in that kind of that environment. It's all very rusty, very falling apart, and we thought that would be quite a good match for our exterior industrial part of Ennis. It also had the main front street, which was where we put the police station. So I think outside Reykjavik, which feels very Nordic and very Scandi, and those very kind of Christmas cardy, you don't have to go. You don't have to go. You don't have to. It's not a huge ask to find towns that match in their architecture, really. I also felt like, once you put the snow in, once we put American cars in, American flags in, it's all going to be shot at night. Like there's a lot on our side in terms of creating an environment, and I don't think you have to work particularly hard as long as it doesn't feel too Nordic or too Scandi to get the right feeling, the right environment. The bigger thing I think, which I thought would be easier than it was finding interiors. I kind of imagined that there would need to be a kind of quite a lot of a redressing in most spaces. But I had imagined that we would be doing less. I think every interior we stripped out completely. I mean, changed the radiators because American radiators are different to European ones. Brought in new American fridges because their fridges are twice the size of Icelandic or European ones ordinarily. So I kind of learned a little bit, whereas I thought the exteriors would be harder. They ended up being a bit easier, and it was the interiors that were a lot more labor intensive. It was just a little bit more of a skew on what I first imagined, really. The other bonus, really, which was a huge bonus, was that near Reykjavik there is a place called Keflavik, and Keflavik is or was a functioning American army base, built by the Americans, furnished by the Americans, with a load of American dressing tables, chairs, everything else in. I think it ceased to be an army base a few years ago, quite a few years ago. So the furniture had kind of, through Icelandic eBay, had kind of migrated its way around the island. So we started quite early trying to get back all of that kind of furniture that was in the base or originated from the base. And then use that actually as a kind of as a grounding, as a starting point for all of the interior dressing. And we had American buyers in the part of the set deck team in America sending stuff over. So I think, I mean, I feel like, and certainly whenever I've spoken to any of the Americans on the crew and the Alaskans that I've caught up with since, have said we nailed it. It was pretty seamless. Certainly, when we went there on a recce, I took photos of the front street, and the photos had this very kind of specific lights that go across the street. We managed to find similar lights and dress those across the street. So when you cut from our Icelandic Alaska to Alaska, it's pretty interchangeable because the lighting kind of just fools you a little bit. I think that probably answers that one, ish.
Yes, the short answer is yes, but what I find like interesting to hear from the answer is the way that you could probably use the space, and also the sort of luck of having that army base as well. And you could probably
Yeah, it's
think
quite
like,
fortunate. Yeah.
and then having that idea of like looking at it and being like, wow, this is what you kind of have like a little bit of a cheat sheet, shall we say, of
Yeah.
how things would be stationed there, and also the Americans what they would have in their living areas. So I guess
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, certain things in their quarters, or as you mentioned, like the refrigerators, little things like that, which I guess like as a normal person, because you're watching the show, you kind of subconsciously think, if you're American, you're watching it, you're like, yep, you subconsciously know that's a big fridge, or that's a certain type of radiator that you have, because it's so easy. Those little details would take you out straight away.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it's, it's the same with like plugs as well,
I
plug
mean,
sockets.
if you look very, very closely, we devised, or the graphics team and set deck team devised an ingenious little European to American plug cover up. I mean, when you do period jobs, you're forever seeing those horrific boxes that are kind of planted everywhere to hide a plug, and you end up looking at the box and you're noticing the box more than you'd have done the plug underneath. But we've got these little stickers and that we put on over the top of the European ones to turn them into American ones. So I mean, if you look super closely and you freeze frame, you'll see them along the way. But yeah, there was loads of little things like that because it is Iceland. Everything needs to come out, and then we need to repaint, and everything needs to go back and to go back in again, because invariably there'll be some Icelandic text on something that needs to be either covered or replaced. So it ended up being not dissimilar from a period job in that respect, because it wasn't like you could just turn up and turn over. Everything needed to be kind of assessed and dressed, really. I mean, there was very, very little that we could get away with on the whole.
Those are the little details that you can catch you out when people would be, as you said, freeze frame it if something's wrong. They can,
Yeah,
they could probably go to town with you on online, and you'd be like, oh, we could be
yeah.
in a bit of a serious problem here. At the same time, I guess like as a follow-up question as well, like what is like one detail that would surprise the audience that you needed to take into account when you were designing?
I mean, I think it probably the thing that I found kind of the trickiest that was always a headache was the light switches, because they're different, and we had Americans on set and they were like they're not right. We'll need to definitely change those, but it's not. You know, you can't just change a light switch. You need to get an electrician to come in, take the plate off, reconnect it. Invariably, because we're shooting at night and people are going to come in and come out, and the amount of times people are turning on and off light switches in the show, so they need to work. So they need to be kind of, they need to be rigged by the electricians to kind of to be able to turn on and off. There were actually a lot of American cars in Iceland, so that I thought was going to be a bigger headache than it was. But the Icelandics drive a lot of American cars on huge bubble tires because they take them up on the glacier. So whenever we had a car on set, an American car, invariably it needed to go to the mechanics the day before, have the wheels, the tires changed, it go onto set, and then before it goes back to the owner, go back to the mechanic for the original tires to be put back on. So what would have been a single day hire for the action vehicle is now 3 days hire because you've got to change the wheels every time. So it starts to kind of mount up in terms of a cost on how much money you're actually spending on screen versus how much is going on to facilitate.
Isn't that funny as well? Like the idea of hiring a car to then have that go in and out of the garage just to
Yeah,
change the tires.
yeah.
Uh,
It's the same with the radiators. I mean, they were a headache because you've got to get a plumber in, turn the water off, take the radiator off, do whatever you're going to do in terms of the dressing. I mean, if we could hide the radiators with a bit of furniture, then we would do, but there were some occasions where we definitely couldn't. So yeah, exactly. You kind of have to get the plumber in and take the radiator off, dress, shoot, strike, and then reinstate the radiators before you leave. I mean, it was a bit of a headache to do that every time.
yeah, even that, like thinking about radiators and even the sort of troubles that they can give you with the way that they need to be bled in a certain way or they have to
Yeah, yeah. I
look a
mean,
certain way. It's just like mental, just thinking about it.
the other thing that I wasn't expecting that ended up being a headache was or a little bit tricky was that we set the schedule up in that we were supposed to be starting to shoot in September and we were going to start with the interiors because there's no guarantee when the snow comes. So we obviously want snow for True Detective. There's no point shooting outside if the snow isn't here. So you try and schedule those exteriors as late on in that year as possible, or the beginning of the next. Our kind of window is mid-December to mid-February, where you would be guaranteed, not guaranteed because nothing's guaranteed, but a very, very extremely high chance of getting snow. There were 2 weeks before we finished at Christmas where we were shooting exteriors and we didn't have snow. And there's a couple of scenes outside Kavik's bar is the other part of the town which we shot the other part of Ennis, which we shot down in near Reykjavik, as opposed to Dalvik, which was full of snow, which we shot in the north, which is where the police station is and where she has that car accident right at the very beginning. So that first exterior was fake snow. That was all paper snow that we had to bring in. So that felt um, odd because we had gone to Iceland for the snow, yet we were still laying fake snow in Iceland, which seemed kind of slightly strange way of doing it. But because the schedule meant that we had to shoot those sequences, that sequence before Christmas, it meant that we had to do it that way. And then when actually the day that we left on I think it was the 16th or 15th or 16th of December, when we were taking off, all the foreign crew were going back. That's when the snow came, and then the snow came and lasted through until February. And it kind of came. It was like 4 or 5 feet of it. Just literally as we were taking off, the kind of clouds opened, and we were taking off, going through the snow clouds, which was lucky because we were worried that we may be having to lay fake snow down for the corpsicle, which would have been which would have been a nightmare, impossible.
When you hear about that, sort of like the snow parts, and I guess with working with the elements, like how do you take that into consideration when you're working and designing? Because if there's no snow, then in your case you have to then do the what's it called, the fake snow, and
Yeah.
line it up that way.
Well, we did for that one sequence, and I mean I think it's been improved a lot in post production. The CG kind of smartened it up a little bit because it did look. I suppose when the whole show is shot in real snow, just the way that it behaves, the way that it sounds when you tread on it, just the way that your voice sounds when you're talking over the top of it, it kind of it just alters everything. And I think we shot that outside Cavix with fake snow, and then the real snow came, as I mentioned, and we shot the rest of the season in real snow. We still had to complete two or three wide exteriors in the spring and back in Reykjavik. And when we came back to Reykjavik after being up north, the snow had gone. And I think everybody had kind of thought, we really missed the real snow. It's going to be a real shame to have to lay paper snow down. So we managed to find a kind of mountain or a range of mountains not too far from Reykjavik that was still completely covered in snow. And we just brought snow down to dress the sets, the exterior sets near Reykjavik with snow from the mountain. So we had a lorry, a JCB at the top, like literally picking up snow, loading it to a lorry. The lorry would come down and just empty snow onto the set. So we had kind of a team of snow dressers that were just ferrying snow off the mountain and then blown everywhere. So that was another thing that I kind of learned on the job, really. That we wanted to kind of get the sets dressed, and then we needed to allow 2 or 3 days for the snow dressers to come in and kind of lay the snow around, dress the snow in. So you kind of had to make sure everything was done in the right order, and I just kind of anticipated that the snow would be there all the way through, really.
Again, what a funny thing of like as a job being like a snow dresser
Yeah.
and making it look correct and fine
Well,
for when
I mean,
people
they
slip
had the
on.
amount of different tools they had to kind of blow snow through. They had big snow blowers, smaller snow blowers. They had little handheld snow blowers because at the moment, there's loads of scenes where people are walking out onto the ice. The moment you walk out onto the ice, you've left footprints. So you need to, reset the actor and then snow blow all the footprints away again so you can go again. So the snow dressing thing ended up being kind of I mean, it was always going to be hugely important, but I just didn't realize kind of what you were able to do, the capacity of the Icelandic guys and what they were capable of.
I think as well, like you think about it, and those are the little details, like as you said, the footprints that people would lay there, and how even maybe how snow would lie from a certain area.
Yeah,
If there's a wind machine on or something,
yeah,
how it would float away because you don't want it all to float away, but you want
no,
part
no,
of it to float away. So
yeah.
yeah, what crazy thing to think about.
It was quite a learning curve, a steep learning curve about how snow behaves, what kind of snow we want. And sometimes actually we'd laid fake snow, we'd laid real snow, but fake snow was in the air. I mean, sometimes it was actually blowing a blizzard at the time we were shooting. There are a few occasions where we had to kind of stop because it was so ferocious. Actually, that was another point. We had a kind of very, very competent health and safety team with us all the way through. And certainly when we were filming up north, when the weather conditions were likely to change, and we were kind of the town Dalvik was kind of about an hour north of Akureyri, and there's only kind of a thin road that leads the two, which can kind of get covered in snow super quickly. So we were kind of, I think probably only 2 or 3 times kind of given the warning that there's a blizzard coming. We need to get back to the town before we're kind of snowed in, really. So that was something that was new to me. Just that level of kind of appreciation of the elements, really, because we could have been stranded at any time. Certainly, the shooting crew could have been.
Yeah, isn't that crazy as well? that he could be stranded somewhere, and then yeah, who knows what could happen afterwards as well.
Yeah, yeah.
There's something that Florian Hofmeister, the cinematographer, pointed out to me when I was talking to him beforehand. And he was talking about how the inside was always lit quite brightly and having that safe feel to it, protecting characters from the darkness outside. As a designer, did this idea slash theme play into how you design space and how it would look and feel?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think what we were conscious to do, what I was kind of very aware of when we were actually recceing, is that they didn't really have like net curtains on the windows in Alaska. I didn't really see them very often. You were very conscious, very aware of what was the other side of the glass. And I think what we wanted to do in terms of create a kind of a level of anxiety and worry for the audience is being able to make sure that we didn't cover the windows all the time and we dressed outside the windows. So very often, there's 3 or 4 interior sets that we built in a studio, and ordinarily you wouldn't choose to spend huge amounts of money dressing what's outside the windows, but because we wanted to make sure we lit outside the windows, the kind of blue snow, we always wanted to remind the audience that that horror is literally just the other side of the glass. So it was a kind of very concerted effort to make sure that we did dress outside the windows for those studio builds, and that we could see outside the windows. The outside was lit, but there was always a contrast. There was always that kind of conflict of the horror that's just waiting outside, compared to how homely and warm it is inside. I think that comes across as well. I feel like we made a kind of a real effort to have snow falling kind of outside the police station. I mean, on all of those set interiors where, even Salau, which is obviously a studio build, those big windows, we wanted to make sure that you kind of got that sense that there is something horrific just waiting outside.
I guess as like a design point and lighting point, it's creating that sort of, what's the word? Sort of just the good versus evil, light and darkness,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
having that a lot of bad things happen out in the darkness,
yeah,
whilst everything else is there in the light. I think as audience members, you'll see that as the show goes on, that it might be there in when things come from the darkness into the light, bad things still happen there as well.
yeah,
But you get that sort of sense of idea of like you don't really know what's out there in the dark, especially with all that everything that's frozen over.
yeah.
Like one little wrong turn and that's it. Like you could be lost forever.
Yeah. No, for sure, absolutely. But I think, and making sure that, excuse me, making sure on our frames that the window is in shot, that we as the audience are reminded that literally just over that shoulder is a darkness that is all consuming. Is really unsettling, I think, rather than just pulling a curtain or having a drape in front of it. I think you just need to kind of continually remind the audience that there is something hideous outside. I think that's one thing that Ita and I were talked about a lot on the recce, is trying to, where possible, remind the audience of the remoteness, how desolate it is, how isolated they are. I was very keen to try and get these kind of radars. They've got these satellite dishes, because that's basically, the only way that you can get kind of mobile phone signal comes in through there, because in the middle of the winter there aren't any roads. The sea is frozen. You can't boat into Ennis, like you can't Nome or Kotzebue. Like they are so isolated. And one thing actually that I was told when we were on our recce, which I've repeated probably, and it's the most repeated anecdote from me to my crew, was that when we went to the cemetery when we were in Alaska, and one of the guys that was taking around the cemetery pointed out the fact that the permafrost is so thick, it's so deep when it comes, that if somebody was to die during the winter, you can't bury them. So if they're not very well, they dig their graves before they die in the spring. And I just think there is something so macabre and fucked up about somebody existing, yet, somebody living, but knowing that there are a number of graves that have already been dug for the winter, and your name might be on one of them just because you're not very well, or you've reached a certain age, or you've got an illness. I just think, living with that kind of that understanding of mortality is pretty well, it's pretty defining, but kind of inspirational, and also kind of I think it's a really nice kind of anecdote for the entire project, really, the entire kind of feeling.
When you hear that, it is just sort of crazy, right? That
Yeah.
you can't. There's that certain point in the year where you can't bury your dead. You'd have to have it pre-prepared, and I don't know. I guess it's very difficult to get your head around that idea of those sort of things happening, and
Mm.
that's another thing that should be taken into consideration, that when you're sort of building that world as well, and
Yeah.
how, yeah, just mental, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of what we wanted to try and keep reminding the audience about, is like literally where possible rubber stamping this idea that they're living in almost like it's on a different planet. They're kind of what those kind of communities have to go through every year. I mean, actually, when in the summer it's beautiful. I mean, it's very temperate. People are jumping off the bridges into the water, stunning flowers and fruit picking, and it's beautiful. But when the polar night comes, it's pretty terrifying. I mean, we shot in Iceland. It doesn't get quite as dark for as short a period of time as it does where we're setting Ennis, but it's not too different. And the sun was up at like 11:30 and then on its way down again by 2:30. And very often you didn't really see it. If it was cloudy or you're in a place where it was going to just come up behind the mountains, then just the sky would change color slightly and then it would go dark again. It's quite a kind of, although I actually rather enjoyed it. I don't think I would. I thought I thought it was gonna be all too much for me, and I was gonna really struggle with it. But they keep their Christmas lights on until like February or March, just to try and kind of maintain some level of hope there. But yeah, no, I think we all kind of embraced it really. I think it was quite fun.
Well, that's one thing that might put me off a little bit, is just the idea of like how much darkness and
Yeah,
how little light you might see. But I guess you'll get used to it in a way, and
yeah.
understand the sort of like ins and outs of it all.
Yeah, I mean, I actually found it harder in the summer when there was no dark and you couldn't sleep. Like people walking down the high street at 1:30 in the morning with sunglasses on still. Like it's like, and you get 2 hours of it kind of being slightly kind of dark, a little bit almost like it's overcast, and then it's bright sun again. And we didn't have blackout curtains where we were staying for the beginning bit. I mean, we made sure we got them. And then even the Icelandic guys were like, honestly, when the winter comes, you really wish you weren't moaning about lack of darkness, because it's going to come and it won't stop. So it's a very, very different and interesting kind of approach to the seasons there.
I think it's quite funny. It's like touche about the blackouts curtains, and it's like you'll rule the day when you got
Yeah,
those into your where you're
yeah.
staying. I also am curious to know about the underground ice set. So for me, I think it looks really cool. I think there's a way that it looks and the way it's lit, the set decorating in it as well. It's kind of like a very cool idea of construction and the sort of like geography and geology of it all.
Yeah.
So there's certain things that I guess you would have to sort of think about when you're designing it. But
Mm.
where did you begin in your design process for this? And is there certain specific things that you looked at in your research? And are there certain design points that you needed to take in that need to be considered, like due to it being underground?
So kind of our starting point was real ice caves, and of which there were a few in Iceland. They seem to appear and disappear each year as the snow and the ice moves. More ice caves appear that weren't there last year. So we went and visited a few. I mean, I was very keen to shoot as much on location as possible, especially when it came to the ice cave. Not only because I was kind of apprehensive about recreating successfully kind of this huge stretch of iced tunnel that I don't think I've kind of seen before on TV. They certainly haven't done before in Iceland, because you just go and shoot in an ice cave. And it was always kind of hanging over us towards the end of the shoot, and in terms of how we were gonna achieve it. So I kind of there was a bit of a process, really. I mean, firstly, I kind of sat down with Issa and we understood kind of quite how long this first part of the journey needed to be. There was a bit of walking and talking, and then there was a kind of a bit of a left and a right, and then she hears the sound, and then they kind of duck through this very, very tight part that opens out into a kind of a small little kind of atrium area where they drop through, and then they drop into the laboratory, the ice laboratory. So my process was that what I wanted to do is understand the size and the proportion and the scale of the ice tunnel before we built it. And it's not like a set where you generally understand where windows and doors are going to be and how high it's going to be, because it's kind of very organic. I felt like and our time constraint meant that we couldn't really do it and then change it and then redo it and then change it again. We needed to kind of be on the money from the start. So yeah, there's a VR specialist art director called Greg Shaw, who has production design, has supervised, but he's particularly talented in designing sets or set modeling sets and then turning them into Unreal, which is the games engine. So we were able to have our characters in the games engine based on a selection of reference that I had found that Issa had approved, do the walk and talk down through this tunnel. And Issa was able to put VR goggles on, stand in the space, understand the height, the width, how the tunnel changed, the direction that it changed in terms of a left or right and went down. So we were pretty accurate in terms of our previs before we even started the set construction. I suppose the trickiest part was trying to fit it all on one stage. So we kind of hacked it into bits so that you kind of leave one section and join another, and you have to do a little bit of a cut to kind of help us through. And then at each stage of the construction, in terms of its length and its proportion, I asked Issa to come back and we did a walk and talk and rehearse this, and she understood the space. And it wasn't ever like da on the day. It was the first time she'd seen it. We kind of got stages approved as we went through. In terms of its look and the lighting, we had done a couple of tests where we had built a little section first, sent it up, lit it, showed it to Florian. Florian thought it needs to be a bit more like this, or a little bit thicker, or a little bit less like that. And then we went away, we remodeled it, sent up another section, dressed it, lit it, and then presented it to him. He then played with it in terms of the lighting. So we before we had started, before we kind of really started construction, we were in a really good place in that he'd seen some decent sized samples and was confident with how he was going to move forward with its lighting. And we had done lots of previews with Issa that had been VR walkthroughs, so she understood the scale of it and size and proportion. And so and then it basically came down to its construction, and then we handed it over to the special effects guys, and they did all of the frost and snow work until they were happy, or I was happy. And then Florian came in and pre-lit it. There were sections that we had kind of drop the bomb door sections at the bottom. So there were whole bits that we put up on 2 or 3 meter high rostra so they could fall straight through the floor. And there were other bits that certainly the laboratory, we've got this kind of the arm drops down into the kind of the cavern where the ice cores are drilled. So because we wanted to see down, we had to elevate that set as well. So there are a few elements that we built on different heights. It was like a theme park there, to be really honest. And the amount of times I kind of turned up at the weekend just to double check a snow dress, and somebody else from the Icelandic crew was showing their neighbor around, or there was a dog running up and down in it because no one had done anything like that before, and certainly not to the scale. It was pretty amazing, really. And on the neighbouring stage, we had a tank where we sank Jodie. We dropped Jodie through. There was a bit with a kind of back project. The like we had not back projection. It was the LED screens for the car stuff, and then we had another bit of exterior kind of tundra that we'd built there. So honestly, you could kind of walk through these 3 or 4 big stages, and it was quite magnificent to see all of the separate little kind of elements that we'd built for the end sequences.
I think it's so one, it's crazy to hear, like it's crazy to hear how much goes into the logistics of where you're shooting in such a sort of small area. But then on when you're designing and going by bit, as you said, it's like a theme park ride of like going deeper and under
Yeah,
and trying to get in the right sort of spaces. I think as well, like bringing the special effects crew in to like frost up the ice to make sure that it looks correct for when you're shooting. And then when Florian comes in to say, no, there needs to be a little bit more of different things added in or taken away.
yeah,
Um, because when you see the space, it obviously it's very lived in, it's very has that feel to it, but it has that yeah, you feel very claustrophobic in it. So it's
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
funny hearing that it's spread over a number of places on the stage. That it's like it's a lot bigger than you'd think while
yeah, yeah. I
shooting.
mean, I mean, the funny bit was obviously when you're kind of looking one way. When you're looking one way behind camera, we've taken a huge section out of ice of our fake ice, so crew can come in and out, and you've got cables running through it. I mean, it's and then obviously when you turn around, everybody moves out the way. You bring in the apparatus and you close the wall in our fake ice wall, and then the SFX guys kind of come in and frost spray the joins, and hopefully it disappears and you can't see that there was a door there. But I mean, yeah, it's it was a set that was I was a little bit I was very worried about it, to be truthful, at the very beginning, and I was really hoping that there would be a way that we would find that we would be able to schedule it, that we could shoot on a location. But as the story developed, things changed. Obviously, having kind of the ice cave that was available to us was in the middle of nowhere. People would need to be overnight. The kind of working at that temperature would have been ghastly for the shooting crew. Very quickly it became a kind of non-starter, and it was left to me and my department to kind of create the kind of ice cave tunnel, which yeah, I mean, I know that VisFX have tidied it up a little bit. There's little tiny sections that needed a bit of a polish, but in the main, I think 99% of it is what you see on screen is kind of is what we built.
Yeah, and yeah, I get when other people come in to sort of tidy it up, but it's still just it's such a cool set, and there's also the idea of it being lit by a generator, so you have that
Yes.
play on like how even more claustrophobic it
Yeah.
can be
Yeah.
for our characters in that area.
Yeah.
But just to sort of go to, because I know we've run on for quite a long time, and I don't want to take up any more of your time, but I've got 3 more questions left. When it comes to a show like this where it's shot on location and on sound stages, do you ever have to think about the continuity in scenes if they're spread over the two?
When you say continuity, do you mean specifically when we are as an exterior, we see somebody go into the door and then we cut into the door, what we see outside the windows, for example, or kind of how
Yeah,
we kind of marry the environments?
yes, that's correct. Yes.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and there were a few occasions where, say, for example, there was a lovely exterior that I really wanted to use for outside Hanks, and we ended up using a neighboring house for his interior. so what we had to do is for the exterior there was this really kind of elaborate, not elaborate, but there was a second door higher up above his main entrance door with a set of steps and a kind of weird stroke bin store. And we needed to create that just for the shot inside when he comes to the door, and we've got our camera inside the space. So when we look through the door, it matches the exterior that we've just seen him kind of walk up the drive of. So absolutely, there are so many occasions where we are having to kind of cheat an angle, cheat a view, or recreate a bit of scenery to try and sell the idea that it is where the interior matches the exterior. The amount of times we've moved cars around or parked a car outside an exterior, so we know that when we're on the interior, we can park that car there, and it will help sell the audience that it's the same space. There's definite little tokens that we put in to try and help the audience buy into it. Yeah, yeah,
Okay, because I could always imagine that those sort of things should be taken into consideration when you're designing. But I guess
yeah,
it's also like the logistics of the day. I have like day 21, you'll be outside here, but then day 37,
yeah.
then you have to sort of cheat it by being somewhere else.
I think it's tricky as well because as a designer, you've got to have a fairly good understanding of how scenes are photographed. It's not just understanding the space as a space. It's realizing that actually we're definitely going to be shooting across the threshold of a door if there's a conversation there. We know that we're going to be over a shoulder of somebody who opens the door, and then the reverse is looking down the hallway. So, I mean, that's just a very simple example, but you have to, I feel like it's certainly on this, when you've got one director and one cinematographer and they're shooting all the way, all six. So there are some sequences, some scenes that we've either recorded in September that we're shooting again in February. And you kind of have the trust that the cinematographer isn't going to shoot stuff that you don't want to see. And also he has to trust me to have a rough understanding of how scenes are covered, so that I dress to make sure that to make sure that the story is told, and I don't kind of catch them out on the floor. If that makes sense. I think you need to. I think a good production designer has to have an understanding of how things are photographed. I mean, ultimately.
Yeah, there's that as well, and I think it makes sense that you kind of not leaving people flat-footed on the day that you shoot, that
Yeah.
it kind of looks seamless on the screen,
Yeah,
in
yeah, yeah,
terms of
yeah.
what needs
I
to be
mean,
done.
yeah, I mean, whenever I got to the end of a dress day and I knew that the unit were coming there tomorrow, I would take photographs of how I saw scenes play out, or key angles that I thought would work, problems that I thought we might encounter, and then sent them across to them. And invariably, if there was a problem, then I had the afternoon to solve it, or there would be a way of solving it the morning of, whether I just found something overnight that could get us out of a kind of tricky situation. But there was a constant dialogue between me, Florian, Issa, and Richard, the first AD, about what was being scheduled and shot the following day.
Yeah, and I guess like the fundamentals is always like the communication and
Yeah,
understanding where what's what and what's going on,
yeah,
and looking ahead of the schedule as well to see that actually these two are going to match. So we need to make sure that we're on top of that one.
yeah, 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 for
Um,
sure, for sure.
and there's that. Um, to hit my penultimate question, what was the hardest set to design?
The hardest set. I thought the one that had the most moving parts. To be honest, I've said this on a couple of podcasts, and actually, Issa and I have talked about this at length. It didn't ever feel like any of the sets, because they were so well written and we seemed to find really good locations or really good reference. Nothing felt like overly forced. It didn't feel like we were really having to make it work in this space, or that character we had to kind of really kind of keep reinventing a color palette, or a kind of or a narrative for their backstory. They all seem to settle into a location or a design or a kind of theme really, really nicely. And they also, I think that was because we had a kind of extensive pre-prep, and I know Issa, and we kind of plotted a kind of the narrative of all of the locations pretty seamlessly, and they weave together very well. I think the one that I found the most complicated was probably Salao, because it first started out as a kind of Issa and I were back and forthing about the general layout of the space, and it required a huge amount of research and reference and going through all of the Arctic research centres and the Antarctic research centres, speaking to Robert, as I mentioned, our paleoclimatologist, about the layout, understanding that the layout would work for Issa's for the story fundamentally, and where the long corridor where they kind of run up and down. But I think also we had that was happening at the same time. The exterior concept work was happening by a guy called Vincent Jenkins, who again I've worked with on Tetris and Argyle. He's a kind of close colleague friend. So he was busy kind of painting up the exterior, whilst I had another guy called James Collins working out the interior model, and then trying to marry those two together. And then once you have a kind of you have that set working together as an exterior and an interior, then it needs to go across to the VisFX guys and make sure that they are working off of the same reference, so that it really felt like there was lots of moving parts for that set. And it's definitely one that I'm very proud of, because I feel like we've really nailed it in terms ultimately in terms of that kind of Nostromo Overlook Hotel vibe that I think it has. And actually walking around it just with the torch, there's a couple of occasions where everybody would go and I just want to just walk around and make sure I'm just happy with it. There wasn't any little tweaks. Just think about it in the space whilst you're there on your own. And it was absolutely terrifying, walking along that big corridor, just you on your own with the torch. It was a little bit unsettling. So I feel like that was possibly the most complicated one.
Well, at least, if you've done something right, if you're walking around your own set with a torch and you're scared. Um, so there's something obviously done right, correct there. So I
Yeah,
wouldn't. So I think there's something, pat on the
yeah,
back on that one. But
yeah,
but also the fact that amazing how, because you're so into what you're doing, it's kind of like mental to think that when you go to your spaces and how it's sort of like because you know what's going around in the area and what's happening, it's a bit like, well, this is this can be scary.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and I guess it's the same when you work on different locations in various places. Like I remember being in like Reading prison for location filming, and then me and somebody else were the last two there leaving, and it's just like, oh, creeps, man, the
yeah,
creeps.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And then just to hit with my final question, what was your favorite set to design?
I I mean, I don't have a specific favorite, I think, but I would say that the one we've just talked about, Salal, I enjoyed the process of doing it with Issa, with our paleoclimatologist, with our concept guy, with our set designer, and with the VisFX guys. That was great fun to do as a kind of collaboration. I really loved, and actually I texted Issa today because I saw it last night and just really thrilled about how it's turned out. Was the exterior Navarros, that funny little cabin thing that we built that from scratch. There was nothing there. We found a little lake with a beautiful mountains in the distance, although we shot it. So I think there was one, maybe a little establisher that's coming up later on in the season where you get a kind of horizon line. But that was a lovely one. It was beautiful and it was well executed. And the snow came when it was supposed to come and just bedded everything in. And I just felt that was really, really strong. I really, really loved how that one turned out. Police station. I mean, I find police stations on screen boring, really, 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 really tedious. But we found a space that Issa really liked on the American Army base, actually. She really liked the kind of layout that I'd got planned for where Danvers' office was in relation to the kind of staff room and prior. And then we couldn't go to that location because of we couldn't control the light outside the windows. So we basically rebuilt something very similar. We changed the geography slightly to include the cells and the little kind of the counter and the little kind of waiting room. But that just worked really, really well, and I thought it was really, really interesting how that turned out. I really liked all of the camera angles in that. Yeah, and Susan Iniak's actually I really liked, which is the hairdresser, which I think maybe is in 3 or 4. I'm not quite sure because we're not when I've only seen 1 and 2 at the moment, but I really like the way that turned out. Yeah, I don't think I have a favorite, and I may have missed a couple out, but I think across the board, I'm just really proud of all of them. I think they've turned out really, really well.
I guess it's like picking your favorite child, right? About who's the best and who's not.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I think probably Navarro's as an exterior. I did like Danvers as an interior. I thought that kind of that communicated her fragility, but her kind of her brittleness as well, her kind of her fierceness. I thought Charlotte did an amazing job kind of set decking that interior. And then I suppose the kind of the sum of all of the parts it turned out really, really well. Was Salah. Yeah.
I think, I personally think the show is gorgeous. In terms of just the way it looks, set design as well. Just because I'm not saying that just because I'm talking to you, but it's just a case of just as you said, that like Salau, for example, as well, just how it looks and having that overlook feel and creepiness to it, but then also the town and how it's lived in and how um,
Yeah.
certain things are being looked at in it. I don't know, it just feels very different
Yeah. I
to
think
what you sometimes see.
yeah, I mean, I think one thing I know it's a bit of a cliche, but I think everybody, you often hear that, well, the house is a character or the town is a character. But I think one thing that Issa and HBO and well, I was very, very driven to do was try and give Ennis a sense of place, a sense of scale, and it just feels like it's anchored. I mean, I designed the complete layout of the town, where everybody lived in relation to everybody else, where it was, its kind of latitude and longitude, where you would come if you were going to go from the police station to Danvers's house. I mean, I went through this all with Jodie and with Kaylee in terms of telling them where I thought they would all be located in the kind of in the borough, in the North Slope borough, which is where Ennis is. We really went to town to create the town. And I think giving that place geography really I suppose kind of I'm not sure whether it helped them, but I think it was really reassuring for them that we'd kind of really given it lots of thought to create Ennis.
I guess as a actor, when you're talking to a designer and um, you're you're getting a feel of the area and then the sort of understanding and not just like how the character of the location is, but also the geography of it. Where if you walk down this way, you're going to see this room. If you walk down this way, you're going to see this room, because that's
Mm.
another part as well, probably an actor's psyche, is that you're going to a cupboard that you've been to 100 times before because that's where you
Yeah,
keep the salt,
yeah.
and that sort of stuff. So it probably helps you in that sort
Yeah,
of way as well.
actually, we had we worked quite closely with Fiona Shaw on her interior, and to the point where she came up and was with us whilst we were dressing, while Charlotte was dressing. Charlotte and I have worked with Mike Lee a couple of times, or 3 times, I think Charlotte's worked with him. And he does these kind of actor surgeries where you kind of design the space with Mike and with the actors, and you kind of understand where they've got the table from, why the printer is in that corner, whatever it may be. You really kind of talk through the dressing and the layout of the furniture in a room with them. And Fiona was very keen to do that too, and to make sure that she could lean on a table and know that the table was there, or there was a mark on the floor where the chair always rested against. She was very keen to make sure that she felt like she'd lived in the space for a long time and the furniture had stayed in that position for a while. And it's interesting when you have those kind of conversations with the actors where they are insistent on or very keen to be involved in, coming up on the dress day the day before just to understand the space rather than just look at photographs. She wanted to be a part of it and kind of talk through where she wanted to smoke and where her little area was going to be that she was going to roll a joint, and where the kettle was kept. It was really, really good to kind of just live in the space with her for a little bit and work through her kind of her performance with her. So we were able to kind of deliver a set that she found kind of authentic and real and comfortable in.
Yeah, and it's kind of important that those are the
Yeah.
sort of little things that people don't really realize when people are doing those sort of things, and it's quite funny to sort of think about and hear when people are working on those sort of details. Dan, thank you so much for your time today. True Detective Night Country is streaming now on Max in the UK. It's on Sky Atlantic. Go out, watch Dan and his team's work, and just enjoy it. Probably not what. Probably don't binge it. Watch it one episode a night just to sort of take it all in.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob.
No problem. Sorry that I took up so much of your time. You
No
take
worries.
care.
It's been great fun. It's been lovely meeting you and speaking to you.
Thank you so much. That's very kind. Thank you. It's great meeting you as well, and it's nice to actually have something on record now after so long,
Yeah,
sort of when we first reached
exactly.
out.
Yeah, it's good.
Thank you again. You take care and bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.